Some warnings are not mere superstitions, nor are they crafted for idle amusement or to weave a thrilling tale. Some are born from a deeper truth, whispered through generations, meant to shield us from unseen forces lurking just beyond our comprehension. Ignoring such warnings can exact a price so steep that it shatters lives beyond repair. This is one such story, a tale of defiance, where disregarding a simple caution unleashed a chain of events that unraveled an entire existence. Out of respect for those involved and to preserve the sanctity of their pain, the names of the people and the places have been altered. Let us begin this chilling account, where a single moment of skepticism became the seed of an enduring nightmare. On the outskirts of an ancient, shadowy forest lay a secluded village, home to a community of skilled woodcutters. The villagers depended on the forest for their livelihood, yet they treaded its depths with reverence and unease, for they believed the towering trees were not mere timber, but the dwelling places of unseen spirits. A sacred rule bound their work, one passed down through generations like a whispered warning. Before cutting any tree, they had to seek its permission. Standing before the chosen tree, the woodcutters would solemnly ask, "Is this a normal tree? Does anyone live here?" If the tree remained still and silent, they would proceed with their task. But if there was even the faintest sign, a sudden chill in the air, a rustling of leaves when there was no wind, or a shadow moving where none should be, they would step away, leaving the tree untouched. This ritual was not merely tradition, it was protection, a fragile barrier shielding the village from the wrath of the unseen forces that prowled the forest. For those who dared to break this rule risked awakening something far more sinister than they could ever imagine. John was among the skilled woodcutters of the village, carving out a humble living by turning freshly hewn timber into finely crafted furniture and wooden art. His days were long, filled with the ceaseless toil of cutting wood and shaping it into useful creations. Yet, there was always one lingering issue: time. With the burden of both felling the trees and crafting the products, John found himself constantly stretched thin. Each task ate into the hours of the next, leaving him frustrated and yearning for a solution. If only he had another pair of hands to ease the load, someone who could handle the cutting while he focused entirely on his craft. The thought lingered in his mind until a spark of inspiration struck. He remembered his cousin, Tim, who lived a few miles away and had recently mentioned his search for work. Tim's help would be invaluable. He could handle the labor of cutting and hauling the wood, leaving John free to focus on the finer details of his trade. Without hesitation, John penned a letter to Tim, explaining his idea and offering him a chance to join the work. Days passed, and Tim, eager for an opportunity, wasted no time in accepting the offer. Within a week, he arrived in the village, his eyes gleaming with excitement and the promise of a fresh start. Unbeknownst to either of them, this seemingly simple arrangement would soon unravel into a nightmare neither could have imagined. John greeted Tim warmly, explaining the work and its demands with a sense of relief that his cousin's arrival would lighten his load. Tim listened carefully, nodding his agreement to the tasks. But before Tim could begin his new role, he had to seek approval from the village leader, Eldrick, a wise and weathered elder whose words carried the weight of years and the secrets of the forest. The two made their way to Eldrick's modest home, where the leader sat by a smoldering hearth, his sharp eyes gleaming in the dim light. John explained their plan, outlining Tim's role in their shared endeavor. Eldrick listened in silence, his expression unreadable, until finally, he nodded his assent. But his agreement came with a stern warning, his voice low and deliberate, carrying an eerie undertone that sent a chill through the room. "Respect the forest," Eldrick intoned gravely, his gaze piercing into Tim's own. "The trees are not mere wood, they are homes, spirits, and guardians of this land. Always ask permission before you cut. Speak to the tree and listen for its answer. If you sense even the faintest of abnormal signs, a rustling without wind, a chill that seeps into your bones, or an uneasy stillness, leave that tree untouched. Never disturb what does not wish to be disturbed." Eldrick's words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable, as though the walls themselves bore witness to his warning. Tim nodded obediently, though a flicker of skepticism danced behind his eyes. To him, the idea of speaking to trees felt like a quaint superstition, a relic of a bygone age. He didn't yet understand that Eldrick's warning was not mere folklore, it was a line between harmony and horror. Tim was taken aback by Eldrick's ominous warning, but he nodded politely, masking his skepticism, and followed John back to their home. As they walked through the twilight-draped village, Tim's curiosity bubbled over. "What's with that strange rule?" he asked, his tone a mixture of confusion and incredulity. John's face darkened slightly as he replied, "It's not just a rule, it's a tradition. A sacred act of respect for the spirits of the forest that dwell among the trees. We believe these spirits watch over us and the balance of nature. Disrespecting them invites trouble, sometimes worse. Whatever you do, Tim, you must follow this rule. Always." Tim nodded again, but couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing was more folklore than fact. For the first few days, he played along, mimicking John's ritual. He would stand before a tree, ask the prescribed questions, and wait. But nothing ever happened, no gust of wind, no rustling of branches, no eerie chill. Every tree stood silent and indifferent, as though mocking the ritual. Days turned into a week, and Tim grew increasingly dismissive. He began to mutter under his breath each time he performed the ritual, his words losing sincerity. "This is ridiculous," he grumbled one afternoon, dragging his axe behind him. "Trees don't talk. Spirits don't exist." The forest, ancient and sprawling, seemed to shift in response, but Tim didn't notice. His scoffing voice faded into the depths of the woods, carrying with it a quiet invitation for something unseen to awaken. Before long, Tim abandoned the ritual entirely. No more questions, no waiting for signs. He simply selected a tree, swung his axe, and felled it without hesitation. His efficiency skyrocketed, and the villagers began to admire his work ethic. The praise swelled his pride, and Tim began to see himself as indispensable. Yet, in the quiet corners of the village, Eldrick watched him with growing unease. The elder could sense the arrogance taking root in Tim, and with it, the silent ripple of something far more sinister. One fateful day, Tim ventured deeper into the forest than ever before, eager to claim more valuable timber. His gaze fell upon an enormous, gnarled tree that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. Its roots twisted and coiled like the talons of a buried beast, gripping the earth with unnatural intensity. The air around the tree felt dense, as though it held secrets too heavy to bear. Tim didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to ask permission. Gripping his axe tightly, he struck the tree with all his might. The sharp crack of the blade biting into the wood echoed through the forest, unnaturally loud in the stillness. As he delivered the second blow, an icy chill slithered through the air, prickling his skin. The forest around him seemed to awaken. Branches trembled, leaves rustled, and the faint sound of whispers drifted from nowhere. Yet, the wind remained eerily still. Tim glanced around, his brow furrowing, but his pride dismissed the unease. "Just a trick of the mind," he muttered, driving the axe deeper into the tree's flesh. With each strike, the whispers grew louder, almost pleading, but he ignored them. Finally, the colossal tree groaned, its massive trunk splitting as it began to fall. The ground shuddered as it hit, the sound reverberating like a mournful cry. Satisfied with his work, Tim wiped the sweat from his brow and began the trek back to the village, dragging the fruits of his labor behind him. He felt victorious, even triumphant. But as he passed the forest's threshold, a shadow seemed to linger at his back, unseen yet suffocating. Unbeknownst to Tim, he had made a grave mistake. The tree he had felled wasn't just wood and bark, it was a vessel, a home to something ancient and vengeful. And now, that something was free. That night, as Tim lay in his bed, a sudden, unnatural breeze swept into his room, rattling the wooden window panes before flinging them open with a deafening crash. The cold wind carried with it an unsettling stillness, a silence that seemed to whisper of unseen terrors. Jolted awake, Tim sat upright, his breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted around the dimly lit room, landing on the open window. The night outside was pitch black, the forest's silhouette eerily still against the horizon. As he got up to close the window, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks, a whisper, low and indistinct, drifting through the air. His heart pounded in his chest as the whispers grew louder, circling the room like invisible predators. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning every shadow. And then he saw it. In the farthest, darkest corner of his room, a shape began to form, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness, shifting and writhing as if alive. Tim froze, his mouth dry, his body trembling. The figure grew clearer, taller, its presence oppressive and suffocating. Its gaze, or what he felt was a gaze, seemed fixed on him, filled with rage and malice. Tim tried to convince himself it was a trick of the mind, but then the shadow moved. It leaned forward, releasing a guttural growl that reverberated through the room. Tim's knees buckled as the shadow surged forward with terrifying speed, its inky form swallowing the light. Before he could scream, it plunged into him, entering through his open mouth. His body convulsed, his vision darkened, and then silence. The days that followed were a living nightmare. Tim's health rapidly declined. His once strong physique became skeletal, and his eyes sank into hollow pits ringed with dark shadows. His appetite vanished, replaced by an unrelenting fear that gnawed at his mind. The whispers didn't leave him. They followed him everywhere, growing louder when he was alone. His brash confidence gave way to frantic paranoia. He avoided the villagers, muttering to himself and casting fearful glances over his shoulder. John and Eldrick, observing his descent into madness, decided to confront him. When they found him in his disheveled state, Eldrick's voice was steady but grim. "What have you done?" he asked, his words carrying the weight of a foreboding truth. Tim's bloodshot eyes flicked toward Eldrick, his lips trembling. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "I didn't know it would follow me." At first, Tim vehemently denied any wrongdoing. But under Eldrick's unrelenting, piercing gaze, his defenses crumbled. His voice trembled as he confessed, "I stopped asking permission. It seemed so pointless. Trees don't respond. They're just trees." Eldrick's face darkened, his eyes filled with grim understanding. "You fool," he whispered, his voice low and foreboding. "The tree you cut wasn't just a tree. You've awakened something ancient, something far more dangerous than you can comprehend." Before Eldrick could finish, Tim's body stiffened unnaturally. His eyes rolled back, and a guttural sound escaped his throat. Then, his lips curled into a grotesque grin, and he began to speak in a voice not his own, a deep, resonant growl that sent shivers through all who heard it. The voice rasped,
"This boy has made the gravest mistake of his life. He dared to cut down my home, the sacred tree where I dwelled. Now he will pay. I will drink his blood and make him suffer for his transgressions."
A hush fell over the crowd as they stared in shock and terror. The villagers exchanged fearful glances, knowing this was no ordinary curse. A shared dread settled among them, the belief that this calamity might extend beyond Tim, threatening the entire village. Without wasting a moment, a few villagers sprinted to the priest's home, desperate for guidance. The priest, an aged and solemn figure, arrived swiftly. His expression turned grave as he examined Tim. "This is the demon of the woods," he declared, his tone heavy with dread. "It's unlikely we can save him, but perhaps with an ancient ritual, we may calm the demon's rage and protect the village." The next day, the entire village gathered in the clearing near the forest, united in their effort to confront the looming threat. Eldrick and the priest led the ceremonies. They chanted prayers, burned sacred herbs, and performed the age-old rituals meant to appease the malevolent entity. All the while, Tim, his body now fully possessed, watched with a chilling, mocking laughter that echoed through the air like the cry of a predator toying with its prey. The laughter seemed to convey a dark certainty. The rituals were futile. The villagers pressed on, desperation driving them to continue. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village into an eerie twilight, the demon's sinister amusement proved prophetic. That night, Tim's blood-curdling screams pierced the silence, jolting the villagers from their restless sleep. They rushed to his small home, only to find a horrifying scene. The walls bore deep, jagged claw marks, as though some monstrous creature had torn through them. Furniture lay splintered across the room, and in the far corner, they found Tim's lifeless body. His face was contorted in an expression of utter terror, his eyes wide and unseeing, and his mouth frozen in a soundless scream. The villagers stood paralyzed, their worst fears realized. The rituals had failed, and the wrath of the forest had claimed its victim. The air around them felt heavy, thick with an unspoken warning. The forest remembers, and it does not forgive. The villagers buried Tim at the edge of the forest, hoping to lay his restless soul to peace. To honor his memory, or perhaps to guard against lingering spirits, they planted a sapling over his grave. But what happened next left them all unnerved. The plant grew at an unnatural pace, faster than any tree they had ever seen. Within mere weeks, the sapling transformed into a towering, gnarled tree that loomed ominously over the burial site. The villagers watched in silent awe and dread, knowing this was no natural phenomenon. Whispers began to circulate, rumors that the demon had claimed the tree as its new home, rooted now in the very spot where Tim had been laid to rest. The forest, it seemed, had not released its grip on him. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began. Villagers passing near the tree reported hearing faint whispers, voices that seemed to drift on the wind, though no one could understand their words. At night, strange shadows danced among the branches, moving in ways that defied explanation. The air around the tree grew heavy, carrying an unshakable sense of unease. The towering tree became a grim symbol, a living reminder of Tim's defiance and the terrible price he paid. From that day forward, no one dared to approach it, and the villagers whispered their prayers whenever they passed near its shadow. And so, the tale of the outsider became a cautionary legend, whispered from generation to generation. The tree stood as a stark warning. Some rules are not meant to be questioned, and some boundaries, once crossed, can never be undone. The forest remembers, and it always demands its due.